The phone rang at 6:47 a.m. I was half asleep, still lying on my side, my back stiff, from a night that wasn't quite rest. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't need to. My brother only calls this early when something needs doing. And by something, he always means Mom. I let it ring twice before I picked up. His voice was already annoyed, no greeting. Mom has that appointment today. You said you were free. I sat up slowly. My knees cracked the way they always do in the mornings now. I'm not going, I said. Not angry, not apologetic, just not going. There was a pause, then a scoff. Seriously? Are you being dramatic right now? I didn't answer that. He kept talking something about how I'd always been the reliable one and how he had meetings all day. I could hear him walking keys, jingling, maybe grabbing his coffee. It didn't sound like someone worried about Mom. It sounded like someone inconvenienced. I didn't say another word, just waited for him to finish. He eventually did. And when he realized I wasn't arguing, he hung up. The call lasted under 2 minutes. I sat with the silence after that. It filled the kitchen like steam, familiar but heavy. The window above the sink was cracked open. The morning breeze made the curtain flutter against the tile wall. I could hear the fridge humming, the clock ticking, the tiny creaks of a house slowly remembering it's awake. Everything around me was known. The mugs in their usual places, the bottle of multivitamins I kept forgetting to take. The pill sorter I'd filled last night for Mom set out neatly on the counter. The keys on the hook, the grocery list I wrote last week, but never followed. My life was here, tangibly, physically here, and yet somehow it didn't feel like it was mine. He called me dramatic for saying no. 10 years of yes, and I become unreasonable on the one day I choose otherwise. That's what stayed with me. Not the words, not the tone, but the ease with which I had shifted in his eyes from dependable to difficult. Because I had dared to pause. For a long time, I had been proud of being the one who shows up, the one who rearranges her schedule, the one who quietly makes things work. Not because I was a saint, or because I believed in some grand moral duty, but because it always felt easier to say yes than to explain why I couldn't. And maybe that's how it started, not with a vow or a crisis, but with 100 tiny yeses that added up to a life. I didn't notice it at first, the days blurring, the edges of myself softening until they disappeared. The way helping out for a little while turned into years of routine appointments and responsibility so normalized that no one even said thank you anymore because they assumed I wanted to do it. I didn't want to be thanked. I just wanted someone else to offer. But no one ever did. And this morning when I finally said no, I won't drive her. No, I can't come. No, I don't have the energy. I wasn't trying to make a point. I wasn't trying to shift the burden. I just couldn't. That's what people don't understand about collapse. It doesn't come loudly. It comes softly, like a breath you didn't know you were holding. Like waking up one day and realizing you no longer remember what your own voice sounds like when it isn't managing something. So I said no, and they heard betrayal. I made a cup of tea and sat in the kitchen while the sun crept across the floor. I didn't call him back. I didn't check in to see if someone else had stepped in. I didn't even wonder whether Mom made it to her appointment, not because I didn't care, but because for once, I let that care live inside me quietly instead of acting on it like a reflex. This wasn't rebellion. This was oxygen. There's this idea that the people who hold things together must enjoy the holding, that their silence is agreement, that their presence is permission. But I never agreed to carry all of it. I just never refused, until now. And the moment I did not, with anger, not with drama, just with stillness, I became somehow the problem. The woman who says yes for 10 years is called dependable. The woman who says no once is called selfish. I'm learning to live with that. I don't know what they'll do. I'm not sure I care to know right now. Because the truth is, I don't even know how I ended up in this role to begin with. That's the next thing I'll have to face. Not the fallout, not the guilt, but the simple question I've never allowed myself to ask. When did I start carrying everything and why didn't I stop? It didn't begin with a crisis. There was no single phone call, no sudden fall, no panicked rush to the hospital. It began the way so many things do in families, with something small that no one noticed until it became everything. Mom started forgetting names. She'd call the doctor that nice man instead of using his name. She'd double boil rice and swear the stove was broken. She started watching the same TV shows over and over again, laughing at the same scenes as if for the first time. We all saw it, but nobody said it out loud, not at first. It was me who drove her to her first neurology appointment. Not because someone asked, just because I lived closest. I had some time off between contracts. I was already coming by once or twice a week to drop off groceries. It made sense. That's how it always starts. It makes sense. After the appointment, she asked me to help organize her medications. The week after, she called because she couldn't remember where she parked the car. Then it was tax forms, then the bills. One by one, the tasks migrated into my life. And because I said yes the first time, they assumed I would keep saying yes. Nobody ever made a plan. There was no family meeting, no calendar was printed and taped to the fridge. No one sat down and said, "This will be your role now." But slowly, quietly, I became the one. The one who knew Mom's passwords. The one who remembered the difference between her morning and evening meds. The one who kept her insurance paperwork filed and her specialists looped in. The one who scheduled the follow-ups, filled the pillbox, cooked the bland meals. I wasn't asked. I just stayed. And it felt noble at first. They called me the strong one. My brother said, "We're lucky she has you." My cousin told me I had the caregiver gene. Even Mom, before she started forgetting more, would pat my hand and say, "You always knew how to take care of people." It was praise dressed as love. But over time, I realized it wasn't about me. It was about what I was willing to give up and how convenient that was for everyone else. Because when someone keeps saying yes, people stop asking. It wasn't just the chores, it was the shifting of language. People stopped asking how I was. They'd call and say, "How's Mom?" Even my friends, the few I still kept in touch with, would lead with "How's your mom doing?" and never, "Are you holding up?" There's this thing that happens when you become the caregiver. You stop being seen as a person with your own life. You become a function, a role, a steady hand. And the longer you perform it, the more invisible you become. I remember one evening, sitting in the parking lot of the pharmacy, my arms full of pill bottles, trying to remember if I had eaten that day. I hadn't. I drove home and made oatmeal for Mom and forgot to make anything for myself. I didn't even feel hungry. That was the scariest part, how easily I'd slipped into it. I wasn't sad, I wasn't angry, I just disappeared into routine, into usefulness, into being the reliable daughter. I made charts to track her memory changes. I learned how to speak slowly and with fewer options so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. I researched dietary restrictions and saved articles I thought might help. I read forms at night. I joined a support group online, but never posted anything. There was pride in being competent, in being the one who could handle it, but also a growing ache, the kind you don't talk about, because it sounds ungrateful. They thought I was naturally suited for it, that I had some gift for managing care, but the truth was simpler. I had the most flexible job. I didn't have a husband, I didn't have kids, I didn't have anything I couldn't rearrange. And so I was rearranged. There was no plan, no long-term structure, just a growing expectation that I'd pick up where everyone else left off. Sometimes my brother would send money for groceries. Sometimes my sister would check in with a text that read more like a summary. "Hope everything is okay. Let me know if you need anything." I never replied, "I need you to come here." I didn't want to sound needy. And I think if I'm being honest, I was afraid they would say no. So I stayed. I stayed because it was easier than justifying why I shouldn't. I stayed because every time I tried to imagine what would happen if I stepped back, I saw Mom confused and scared and alone. And I thought, if I don't do it, no one will. That kind of thought keeps you loyal long past the point of health. It keeps you bending until you forget what standing straight even felt like. But there was no resentment yet. Not then. Just the soft, steady erosion of self. I didn't call it burnout. I didn't have the language for it. I just thought maybe next month things will get better. Then maybe next year. And then I stopped imagining a time after. I just lived in it. In the role, in the routine, in the house that slowly stopped feeling like mine. Because when you're always taking care of someone, eventually, you forget what it means to take care of yourself. And no one notices, not even you. There was a time when this house had my laughter in it, when I'd play music in the kitchen and dance barefoot while stirring pasta, when I'd invite friends over for wine and stories, and sit on the floor for hours just being young and not needing a reason. I used to have a framed photo of me and a friend from college on the hallway shelf. One day it disappeared. Mom said she'd moved it because it cluttered the space. I never put it back. Over time, the house began to forget I was even here. The day-to-day was quiet, predictable. I'd wake around 6, make sure Mom had taken her morning meds. Brew tea she rarely drank. She liked toast on the good days, oatmeal on the bad ones. I ate whatever was left or nothing at all. Some mornings I'd realize I hadn't brushed my hair in 2 days. I wore clothes that didn't wrinkle and didn't matter. My phone was always nearby, but barely used. By noon, I'd cleaned the kitchen, changed the linens, helped her shower. Sometimes I'd read to her while she dozed off in the recliner. Afternoons were for paperwork, insurance, doctor appointments, pharmacy refills. I stopped keeping a personal calendar. There was no point. Dinner was at 5, early because she liked it that way. Then evening TV soft volume, same reruns. I'd sit with her not watching Just Present, just in case. At night, I'd scroll mindlessly through social media, not to connect, just to remember the outside still existed. But even that started to fade. The posts looked unreal. Weddings, promotions, concerts, babies. I'd stare at the pictures, not with envy, but with distance, like they were postcards from a life that no longer concerned me. I stopped replying to invites. Eventually, they stopped coming. A friend once asked me to be a bridesmaid. I said yes, then backed out 3 weeks before. I told her I couldn't leave Mom overnight. She didn't ask again. Another time, I was supposed to meet an old coworker for lunch. But that morning, Mom had a dizzy spell. Not serious, but enough for me to cancel. I never rescheduled. It was easier that way. Easier to stay small, predictable, available. I used to paint. Nothing ambitious, just watercolors, soft strokes, quiet work. My brushes dried up in a drawer 3 years ago. I haven't touched them since. The guest room had become a storage space for medical supplies. The dining room table, once used for dinners with friends, now held pill bottles and blood pressure monitors. There was no corner in the house that was mine anymore. No place where I could be a woman instead of a daughter, a carer, a fixture. Even in the bathroom, I kept my toiletries in a small basket I carried in and out. As if I were a guest, as if I were afraid to take up space. It wasn't dramatic, it was erosion, slow, invisible, certain. People think burnout is fire, but sometimes it's water, a quiet flood, no alarms, just a gentle drowning. There were moments I caught myself whispering apologies to no one, for being in the way, for breathing too loudly, for taking up a seat on the couch. I used to dream in color. Now I dreamed of tasks. Refilling prescriptions, checking logs, making lists I'd already written. I thought I was being selfless, but really I was being erased, and no one meant to hurt me. No one ever yelled. No one ever said, "You can't have a life." But no one ever said, "You deserve one" either. It's strange the way self-worth shrinks without confrontation. You don't even notice it slipping. I stopped wearing makeup, stopped reading fiction, stopped caring about holidays. The world reduced itself to a checklist, a loop. Even joy felt like a foreign object. I remember once laughing at a video someone sent me, really laughing unexpectedly. And Mom looked up, startled. "Is something wrong?" she asked, as if the sound didn't belong here anymore. That was the moment I realized this house didn't remember who I had been. And maybe I didn't either. I wasn't angry, not yet, just tired. Tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Tired in the bones and the breath, in the way my name no longer felt like mine when someone said it. But I kept going, because what else was I supposed to do? I was useful. That was enough. Wasn't it? I told myself I could rest later. I told myself it was just a season. But seasons change, and nothing had. It was always Wednesday, always winter, Always 5:00 p.m., and the same TV show playing again. Somewhere along the line, I stopped looking at myself in the mirror. Not because I was avoiding age or fatigue, but because I didn't recognize the eyes looking back, and yet I stayed. Because Mom needed me, because no one else volunteered, because I didn't know how to leave. But then came the nights when the house went quiet, and even she slept soundly, and something else would wake up. Not loud, not angry, just a whisper. It started with small things, tiny slips no one else noticed, but I did. I forgot to refill Mom's calcium supplements. They weren't urgent. The pharmacist had been out of stock, and I told myself I'd pick them up in a day or two. Then I forgot. 3 days passed. 4. And when I remembered, it felt like I'd committed a betrayal. Another time, I gave her the wrong evening pills, a mix-up between 2 bottles with nearly identical labels. Nothing dangerous, but still. I caught the mistake before it mattered. But my hands shook as I poured them back. There was the night I fell asleep too hard just for an hour. Mom had gotten up confused and tripped over a rug in the hallway. No serious injury, a bruise, a scare. But when I found her on the floor, my heart splintered into something I didn't have a name for. She looked up at me dazed and said, "Why didn't you hear me call?" I didn't have an answer, not one that made sense, not one that wouldn't sound like an excuse. I cried in the car the next morning, parked in the grocery store lot, keys still in the ignition forehead pressed to the steering wheel. I didn't make a sound. The tears came the way water leaks from a pipe, steady, quiet, inevitable. I don't remember how long I sat there. I just remember the feeling. Maybe I'm not the right person for this anymore. Maybe I never was. That thought scared me, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt true. Still, I didn't tell anyone. Not when I started waking up with chest tightness. Not when my appetite disappeared for days. Not when I stopped dreaming altogether. Instead, I started writing. Nothing elaborate. Just small scraps of thought scribbled into a notebook I kept in the drawer beside my bed. Things like I don't know who I am without her needing me. Or today I spoke to no one except the pharmacy. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a way to remind myself I still had thoughts that belonged only to me. I never showed it to anyone. But writing it made the silence in the house feel less permanent. Then one afternoon, my vision blurred while I was chopping carrots. I thought maybe I hadn't eaten, or maybe the room was too warm. I sat down, waited for it to pass. It didn't. I ended up in urgent care. The doctor asked if I'd been under stress. I laughed, too loudly. She looked at me gently, then said, "Your vitals are stable, but your body is depleted. You're not sick, you're exhausted." She called it functional fatigue. She said it like a diagnosis, but it felt more like a confirmation. I nodded, said I'd rest, drank the water they gave me. Took the paper with the list of tips, sleep hygiene, balanced meals, breathing techniques. But I didn't tell my family I had gone. I didn't want their pity. I didn't want them to feel guilty. I didn't want them to offer help out of obligation and resentment. Mostly, I didn't want them to panic, only to retreat again once the moment passed. I knew that pattern. I'd seen it before. So I sat there alone in the sterile white of that clinic room, waiting for my labs. And I thought, not angrily, not even sadly, what if I didn't go back? What if I stayed in this waiting room for hours, until they forgot I'd ever left? What if I got in my car and drove until I hit a place where no one knew my name? What if I simply stepped away? It wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't a wish. It was a possibility, a real one. And that realization was both terrifying and liberating. Because up until that moment, I didn't believe I could stop. Not without something breaking, not without something dying. But there I was, apart from her, apart from the house, apart from the routine. And everything was still intact, and I was still breathing. It didn't mean I was ready. It didn't mean I was brave. It just meant I had, for the first time, let the question surface. What if I stopped? What if I let it go? What if I gave myself permission to be something other than necessary? The guilt came in waves, of course. Even just thinking, it felt like treason. But beneath the guilt, beneath the fatigue, beneath the silence, there was something else. A stillness. Not the numb kind, not the empty kind, but the kind that feels like space clearing inside your chest. The kind that feels like the air returning after a storm has passed. That night back at home, I didn't write in my notebook. I just sat in the dark and let my body be still. Mom was asleep, the house was quiet, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't dread the next day. Not because I was looking forward to it, but because I wasn't already inside it. I had stepped out, even just for a moment, even just in my mind, and I knew something had shifted. I woke up shivering. It was early, the sky outside was still blue-black, not yet morning. My skin was hot to the touch, but I couldn't stop shaking. My throat felt raw, and my legs ached like I'd run for miles. I sat up slowly, dizzy with even that small motion. I was sick, really sick. Not the kind of tired you push through with coffee and aspirin. Not the kind you can dismiss as just a little off. This was illness with edges, fever that made your thoughts stutter. I leaned back against the headboard and knew immediately that I couldn't get up today. The phone rang 30 minutes later. I already knew it would. That's how these things go. Your body gives out at the exact moment it's most needed. It was my brother. "Mom's having trouble breathing," he said. His voice was tight, not panicked. "I've got a meeting in 20. Can you take her to the ER?" I swallowed. My voice came out hoarse. "I can't," I said. "I'm sick." There was a pause, then the sound of him exhaling, sharp, annoyed. "Sick. How sick can you be? Can't you just— This is important." I close my eyes. I know it is, but I can't even stand up. Another pause. Longer this time. Then his voice clipped. "Right, fine, I'll figure something out." And then the line went dead. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just lay there, the phone still in my hand, feeling the silence that followed press into my chest. For 10 years I had always answered, always said okay, always found a way, but not today. Today I had no choice. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't a statement. It was simply a truth I couldn't move. I heard the sounds of the house in the distance, the soft buzz of the refrigerator, the wind nudging a branch against the window, my own breath uneven with fever. I didn't hear Mom calling. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't try to get up. I think that's what struck me the most, the absence of guilt in that moment. Not because I didn't care, but because something deeper had taken over survival. I don't remember falling asleep again. But when I opened my eyes, the light had shifted. It was late morning, maybe close to noon. The sun stretched long lines across the floor. I reached for my phone. 3 missed calls, 1 text. From a neighbor took your mom to the ER. She's okay, just precaution, no worries. That was it. Simple, handled. I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. For 10 years I had believed the world would stop if I stepped out of it, that everything would fall apart, that they wouldn't know what to do without me. But they did, and it wasn't perfect and it wasn't smooth, but it happened without me. There's a strange kind of grief in that, relief too, but mostly grief, because it makes you realize you weren't holding everything together. You were just the one most willing to be tired, and the moment you stop, they adjust. I got up late in the afternoon, still dizzy, made tea, took some fever meds, sat in the quiet. No one called again that day. No one asked how I was feeling. No one followed up. Which meant for the first time I was truly not being watched, not expected, not relied on. I was just here, ill, still, free in a way that didn't feel good yet, but felt real. That night I went back to my notebook, wrote only 1 line, "They managed," and underneath it, in smaller letters, I didn't have to be there for them to act. It wasn't resentment I felt, it was distance, like a fog had cleared, and I could finally see the shape of what I'd been inside. And what I saw was this: they weren't helpless. They had simply never had to help. Because I was always there, always 1 step ahead, always catching what was about to fall. But I didn't catch it this time, and no one broke. They just stepped around the gap I left. Maybe that should have hurt, but honestly, it was a kind of mercy. I didn't want to be irreplaceable. I just wanted to know that I could leave, and now I knew. A few days later, Mom asked me, "Why didn't you tell me you were that tired?" She didn't ask it unkindly. She asked it the way someone asks about the weather, as if the fatigue had appeared overnight, as if it wasn't layered into every breath I'd taken for the past year. I looked at her and smiled, Not because I felt happy, but because I didn't know how to answer a question that late. I didn't want to worry you, I said. It was easier than saying I didn't think you'd hear me. My brother didn't bring it up at all. He dropped off groceries one afternoon, asked about the male avoided eye contact. My sister texted me twice that week. Once to say she was sorry things got tense, and again to let me know she was super slammed with a new project, but she was thinking of me. They didn't ask how I was feeling. No one did, which told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that caring required work, and I had always made the work unnecessary. That's the thing about being reliable people, mistake it for resilience. They assume your silence is comfort. Your showing up is consent. Your consistency is a choice, not a survival mechanism. I suggested we hire someone, a part-time caregiver, maybe just a few days a week, and there was immediate resistance. She doesn't need a stranger in the house, my brother said. Mom would hate that my sister added, even though she hadn't been around to know what Mom did or didn't hate. Even Mom looked uneasy. But I have you. That was the moment I knew if I didn't step back, no one else ever would. So I did. I started looking for a studio apartment, something small, nearby, close enough that I could visit help when needed, but not close enough to be summoned without warning. When I told them I was moving, the reactions were quiet sharp. Mom asked if she'd done something wrong. My brother said, "You're abandoning her now." My sister, after a pause, just said, "Okay, do what you need to do." Not one of them said, "We understand." But I didn't need them to. I packed slowly over weeks, folded my life back into boxes I hadn't opened in a decade, unearthed photos, books, old shoes that didn't fit anymore, literal and otherwise. I found the watercolor brushes I used to love, dried out, stiff. I kept them anyway. The new place was quiet. I bought plants, a real kettle, a lamp that gave off soft yellow light. The first night I sat on the floor with takeout and watched the shadows on the walls. No one needed anything from me. No one called. I slept 8 hours straight. In the mornings I started walking, not to get somewhere, just to move. I read again, slowly, let myself sit with a page instead of scanning for a task. I still visited Mom, but not every day, not at a moment's notice, not with the readiness of someone who lives on call. When I arrived now, she'd say, "Oh, I wasn't expecting you," and I'd smile and reply, "Exactly. It wasn't distance, it was boundaries. And they weren't cruel, they were necessary." At first, the family didn't know what to do with the gap I left. Calls became more frequent, not for help, but for reassurance. My brother once said, "So now we're just supposed to figure this out on our own." And I replied, yes. Not to be harsh, just to be honest. Because for years I hadn't made it hard. I had made it easier than it should have been. I had filled in every blank, anticipated every need-solved problems before they reached anyone else. They hadn't needed to learn, because I had never stepped aside long enough for them to try. But now they had to. I watched them fumble schedule appointments, wrong, forget. Medications, double book visits. I didn't intervene. I let the mess exist, because that's how learning happens. And because fixing everything had nearly broken me. Mom adjusted too. Not quickly, not cheerfully, but slowly she began to understand this wasn't a punishment, it was a shift. She stopped asking me to sleep over. She stopped calling past a certain hour. She even started writing down reminders for herself, which she hadn't done in years. I wasn't abandoning her. I was simply letting her and everyone else experience the space I used to fill without asking. And in that space, I started remembering who I was. Not the good daughter, not the capable one, not the family glue, just someone who wanted her mornings. Someone who wanted to breathe without being needed right away. Someone who didn't want to be a version of her mother before she even turned 40. And for the first time in a very long time, I was becoming that person again. Mornings became mine again. Not because they were special, not because anything extraordinary happened, but because no one was asking for me before I'd had a chance to open my eyes. I started brewing tea, real tea, not the kind you sip halfway while cleaning, but the kind you hold with both hands and drink all the way to the bottom. I watched the steam rise, listened to the kettle whistle, It felt like a ceremony, not for anyone else, just for me. Some mornings I wrote, not essays, not plans, just pieces of thought, fragments I'd carried around. During the years, I was too tired to feel them. Things like I didn't disappear, I was just buried. Or quiet is not the absence of love. It's the sound of something healing. No one read them. They didn't need to. It was enough that I finally had a place to put them. My life became smaller but deeper. I didn't go out often, didn't try to reclaim everything I'd missed. I just learned how to breathe without waiting for the next interruption. The phone still rang sometimes, a text from my brother. Do you know if Mom took her afternoon meds? A question from my sister. Do you think we need to schedule another checkup? But they didn't expect immediate answers, and sometimes I didn't respond. Not out of anger, not out of spite, just because I didn't need to. They figured it out, eventually. Mom was still cared for. They coordinated better now. They hired someone part-time. She was kind, gentle, professional. It took them longer than it should have, but they adjusted. And no one ever said thank you. No one called and said, "We're sorry you carried it alone for so long." No one admitted they'd relied on me too easily, too often. And for the first time, I didn't need them to. I didn't want validation. I didn't want recognition. I just wanted distance. And now I had it. There's something deeply freeing about no longer waiting for someone to understand you. It means you can stop performing pain in ways that make other people feel comfortable. I saw them occasionally. Family gatherings, birthdays, holidays. The ones who once called me dramatic didn't know what to say anymore. There was no confrontation, no reckoning, just a quiet space between us that hadn't been there before. I think they knew, not everything, but enough. They knew I wouldn't come running anymore. They knew I wasn't on call. They knew the role they took for granted had been vacated permanently. Now when someone asked, "Are you free?" I didn't automatically assume I had to be. I'd pause, consider. Sometimes I said yes, but more often I said no. And the most surprising part, I stopped feeling guilty about it. There's a particular kind of shame that lives in women who've been told their worth is tied to their usefulness. We carry it quietly, the need to be available, agreeable, needed. Letting go of that didn't happen all at once. It was slow, subtle, like thawing. But over time, I realized something simple and life-changing. I didn't owe anyone my exhaustion. I could be kind without being consumed. I could love without losing myself. I could exist without constantly proving I deserved rest. One afternoon, while watering the small plant on my windowsill, I looked out and caught my own reflection in the glass. It startled me not because I looked different, but because I looked back. For years, I avoided mirrors. Not out of vanity, but because they didn't show me anything I recognized. Now there was someone in the reflection again. Not the daughter, not the caretaker, not the reliable one. Just me. Soft around the eyes, calm in the shoulders, still learning how to want things again. And that was enough. People think stepping away is about resentment. But for me, it was about release. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want anyone to fail without me. I just wanted to live a life that wasn't built entirely around not disappointing other people. And slowly, I was doing that. One quiet morning at a time, one sentence at a time, one refusal at a time. It didn't look heroic, it didn't look brave, but it felt like freedom. And I knew with a kind of certainty I hadn't felt in years that what they lost wasn't a helper or a role to fill. They lost me. The me who used to catch everything without complaint. The me who tolerated without boundary. The me who made it too easy to disappear. And I wasn't coming back. My brother's voice sounds different now when he calls. He doesn't lead with tasks anymore. No lists, no updates, just, "Hey, you doing okay, Short? Careful, a little slower than it used to be." He doesn't ask me to come over. Sometimes I can hear him almost asking and then changing his mind. I think he knows. The version of me who was always on standby isn't here anymore. He still calls, though, which I suppose is something. My mother has stopped asking me to stay the night. It wasn't a decision, really. It just faded, like the way seasons shift without announcing themselves. She's quieter now, not just because of age, not just because of illness, but because she knows I don't bend the way I used to. And that knowledge has changed her. She still needs care, still has bad days. But she doesn't reach for me like she once did not, because she stopped needing me, but because she started believing I might not always be there. And maybe for the first time, she sees me as a person with edges. She never said sorry, but she started saying thank you. And sometimes that's enough. My sister visits more now. She still has a job, still has a life, but she doesn't look at me like I'm some heroic, older sibling who can carry the entire family on one shoulder. She's different around me. There's something about the absence of expectation that makes people more human. We're just two women now, two daughters. Not one savior and one bystander. No one says it out loud, but I can feel it, the shift. They don't ask me to fix things anymore. They've stopped offering me guilt disguised as gratitude. Stopped sending messages that say only if you can, but really mean we expect you to. The requests have thinned. The assumptions have fallen quiet. It's not that they stopped needing help. It's that they stopped expecting me to be the first to offer it. And in that space, I've built something that feels like a life. It's not dramatic. I haven't moved across the world. I haven't written a book or started a business or reinvented myself. But I wake up without dread. I make tea and drink it while it's still hot. I remember what I like. I answer calls when I want to. I go home when I choose to. And I've stopped apologizing for that. Somewhere along the way, I learned that distance isn't cruelty. Sometimes it's clarity. I didn't abandon them. I just stopped standing in a place that asked me to disappear in order to be seen. They still live their lives. I still live mine. But we don't spill into each other anymore. We don't blur the lines and call it love. And for all the space that's grown between us, I've realized something. What they lost wasn't just someone who ran errands, remembered schedules, kept things from falling apart. What they lost was someone who never asked for anything back. They lost the person who filled every silence before it got uncomfortable. The one who carried pain like it was duty. The one who bled quietly so no one else would have to get their hands dirty. They lost me, and not in a blaze, not in anger, just in the slow, quiet undoing of the story I no longer agreed to play. I didn't slam the door. I didn't vanish overnight. I just stopped showing up to be used. And when they finally looked up, I was already gone. Not from their lives, but from that version of me they thought would never leave. And the thing about people like me, the quiet ones, the strong ones, the ones who carry the weight with a smile, is that when we stop, the room feels colder. Not because we made it so, but because they never imagined we'd go. They still talk to me, still send texts, still make plans, but there's something missing in their voices now. And I know what it is. It's the certainty they once had that I would always say yes, that I would always stay, and now they live with the echo of my absence. Not the kind you shout into, the kind that follows you soft and constant, a reminder. I didn't ask for much, only space, only breath, only the right to not be their everything. And in return, I gave up the version of me who couldn't imagine a life outside their needs. I don't regret it, but I mourn her sometimes. The girl who thought love meant becoming small. The woman who thought endurance was the highest form of loyalty. She's gone now, and in her place is someone quieter and stronger, slower. Someone who knows that the most radical thing she ever did wasn't leaving. It was staying gone.